What's up, everyone? You're watching The Young Turks. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and we have a fantastic show ahead for you today. I'm really looking forward to the first hour where I will share the details of how the pharmaceutical industry, which made record profits during the coronavirus pandemic, has decided to raise the prices on literally hundreds of life-saving drugs because, I mean, what could they do? They need the funding for research and development. Of course, we're going to debunk that garbage and more. Later in the second hour, John Aide will be joining me to talk about, well, the reality of Bitcoin bros and billionaires going to Puerto Rico as their latest tax shelter. What is that doing to local communities in Puerto Rico? We'll give you those details and more. We'll also talk about how the Trumps are now auctioning off goofy hats that Melania wore during the Trump administration. Why are they doing that? And will the money actually go to a good cause, or will it just go into the pockets of the Trump family? And in the bonus episode for our members, we're going to talk about the whole Eric Adams debacle. He used some wording to describe the working class that has many people up in arms. We'll discuss why, but more importantly, I want to talk about his policy in response to coronavirus and the Omicron variant. Apparently, he is dead set on forcing remote workers to go back to the office, and I think that's the lead that's being buried right now. But before we get to any of that, I want to encourage you guys to like and share the stream. The bonus episode was a lot of fun yesterday, so if you're not a member, please become one by just clicking on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube, or you can go to tyt.com/join. With that said, let's move on to our first story. Well, it's a new year, which can only mean one thing for incredibly lucrative pharmaceutical companies that have made record profits during the coronavirus pandemic. It's time to raise prices, and they're doing so on literally hundreds of life-saving drugs. And it's not just one pharmaceutical company, it is several of them, and the number of medications that are set to increase in price is likely to grow in terms of like the list of drugs that will be more expensive for Americans moving forward. Now, what does the data say? How many drugs in particular are being impacted by higher prices? Well, pharmaceutical companies increased prices on 460 drugs on January 1st, with most prices up 5% to 6% on average. So which drugs exactly are included in these price hikes? I actually want to start off with Gilead, which is an unfortunate name for a pharmaceutical company. It's an unfortunate name for any company, but nonetheless, they have increased the price of HIV drugs to the tune of 5.6%. So if you are dependent on Biktarvy or Descovy, you're gonna pay more for those life-saving drugs. And if you're fortunate enough to have health insurance, let's be clear that the cost of your premiums and your prescription copays are likely to go up as a result of these types of price hikes. Let's move on to Pfizer, which has in fact made record profits during the coronavirus pandemic thanks to their coronavirus vaccine. Well, Pfizer decided to increase the cost of their breast cancer drug to the tune of 6.9%, and also 6.9% increase on its Prevnar vaccine, and 4.4% on the costly heart drugs that are listed there, Vyndamax and also Vyndaqel. And that's not the only pharmaceutical company that's increasing prices. We also have Vertex, which has decided to increase the price of its cystic fibrosis medication to the tune of 4.9%. And of course, there's a huge issue with that. In addition to the price hike, there's the issue involving how they have monopolized the market in regard to cystic fibrosis medication. It's already an incredibly expensive drug with a list price of $311,000 per year. Now, how do they justify this? I mean, we're talking about companies like Pfizer that have made record profits. Why would they need to increase the price of these life-saving drugs? What excuse are they giving? I mean, they're shameless. They use the same tired excuse over and over again. We need research and development money. I mean, what could we do? We need to price gouge the American people. We need to price gouge Medicare in an effort to raise enough revenue to develop new life-saving drugs. Yeah, except anyone who's paying attention can't possibly buy that. Why do I say it? Well, the reason why I say it is because you take a look at their record profits, you take a look at how much they're paying their executives, particularly their CEOs. And I would argue that, maybe the money could be spent elsewhere if they're, so strapped for cash on research and development. Now, one statement from a Pfizer spokesperson was this: the modest increase is necessary to support investments that allow us to continue to discover new medicines and deliver those breakthroughs to the patients who need them, said a Pfizer spokesperson. When posed specific questions about various rebates that could be offered, the spokesperson said, "We do not disclose detail at that or at the product level." So let's take a look at what their profits are. If you look at Pfizer specifically, Pfizer said it expects a total of $36 billion from the coronavirus vaccine for all of 2021, just from the COVID vaccine alone. And it said, based on contracts it now has signed, it expects revenue $29 billion from the COVID vaccine in 2022. So they're expecting to make even more money, more profits off the coronavirus vaccine in 2022. And to be sure, the coronavirus vaccine is incredibly important. Luckily, you can get the jab for free for now, but to say that Pfizer needed to jack up the prices of other drugs offered by the company in order to make enough money for research and development is laughable. In fact, Pfizer does spend a considerable amount of their resources on their CEO. So why don't we take a look at the pay for the Pfizer CEO? Pfizer Inc. paid Chief Executive Officer Albert Bourla $21 million in total compensation in 2020 alone. $21 million in total compensation in just 1 year, 2020. The overall pay package, which included salary, bonus, stock, and other incentive pay, represented a 17% increase from Bourla's compensation in 2019 when he was paid a total of just 17.9 million. I mean, what could they do? They really want to focus on talent retention here, and it really does take a talented individual to be as callous as this CEO, someone who is willing to jack up prices on life-saving medications, knowing that individuals who can't afford those price hikes are likely to be physically harmed as a result. Some could die as a result. That level of callousness really is a talent. It really is a skill within the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the Daily Poster also reports that corporate Democrats are heavily influenced, and this shouldn't shock any of you, they're heavily influenced by pharmaceutical companies, which might have something to do with the fact that so many of these corporate Democrats in Congress fought aggressively against the provision in the Build Back Better agenda that would have allowed for lower drug prices, that would have allowed for Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices directly with pharmaceutical companies, which, by the way, as it stands today, they are barred from doing. So a top Democratic Party media buying firm, Canal Partners Media, is placing ads for drug industry front groups that want to block Democrats from lowering drug prices as promised in the Biden reconciliation bill. And we've talked about the Biden reconciliation bill, the so-called Build Back Better agenda, in great detail on this show. But for those of you who might want a quick update, that bill is dead. Congress has decided to shelve that legislation because they just refuse. Corporate Democrats refuse to fight for the very agenda that Biden claimed to be supportive of. It's Biden's agenda, but we haven't seen much of a fight coming from President Biden either on that front. Now, Canal Partners also started buying ads late last month for the Coalition to Protect Access, CPA, another apparent pharma front group. CPA has already bought $3.2 million worth of ads for December and January. Now, what do those ads look like? I'm a little curious. Why don't we take a look?
Today, vaccine Vaccines and antivirals are helping fight the pandemic because scientists and researchers in America's biopharmaceutical industry acted fast after investing billions over years to achieve breakthroughs. But now, Congress is threatening legislation that will devastate private industry's ability to fund treatments just like these. What's at stake isn't corporate profits, it's public preparedness. Tell Congress to oppose legislation that would harm our ability to fight pandemics, paid for by Coalition to Protect Access.
And of course, there are a few things that we need to clarify in response to that ridiculous, deceptive ad. Number one, we already see these pharmaceutical companies bringing in record profits and paying their executives handsomely with that money instead of really focusing those resources on research and development. Also, in terms of research and development, a lot of that money does come from us, the US taxpayers, through the National Institutes of Health. So the federal government provides seed money, provides the research and development funding for these pharmaceutical companies to develop drugs that we so desperately need. In fact, a considerable amount of our federal resources went toward developing the coronavirus vaccine. So this argument that, oh my God, look, but if we change this system so Americans aren't price gouged on life-saving medications, well, we just might not ever develop medicines again. That might not ever happen again. What can we do? We have to do this. We have to price gouge you, even though Americans pay on average 2 to 3 times more for these pharmaceutical drugs compared to other developed countries, which is why many Americans travel to other countries, whether it be Mexico or Canada, to get access to the life-saving medications that they so desperately need. And while it might be easy for the Democratic Party to immediately point fingers at the Republicans and GOP lawmakers for their corruption and their cozy ties to the pharmaceutical industry, let's make one thing absolutely clear. Republicans, I think, are pretty clear about who they are. Okay, they don't hide who they are. They don't hide how they're pro-business, pro-corporations, anti-worker. I mean, they might use populist rhetoric here and there, but at the end of the day, when you pay attention to their actions, when you pay attention to their rhetoric overall, in general, they're pretty clear about how they favor corporate interests over their own constituents. But it's the Democrats who present themselves as warriors for the workers, as warriors for their own constituents who have been price gouged by these pharmaceutical companies. They consistently campaign on reforming healthcare. They consistently claim they're in favor of universal healthcare. But when push comes to shove, as soon as they're in a position of power, what do? Oh my God, the Senate parliamentarian is stopping us from being able to do this. Oh my goodness, what could we do? We really tried to convince Manchin and Sinema with carrots after carrots after carrots. No sticks though, to support this legislation, but they don't want to do it. So we're just going to shelve the legislation, the Build Back Better agenda. They always find excuses. And then once we get closer to election time, what do they tell us? If we just had more feckless Democrats in Congress, we would actually be able to accomplish something. Please vote for us. We haven't actually delivered on anything that we campaigned on, but please vote for us. Democrats are in for a political bloodbath in the midterm elections, and they have no one to blame but themselves. But to be sure, they'll blame progressives. They'll blame people like us who criticize them for discouraging voters from showing up to the polls to vote for them. They'll find all sorts of scapegoats, much like Hillary Clinton after her massive fail in 2016. But fact of the matter is, you can't just consistently campaign on being a warrior for the little guy and then turn around and disappoint again and again and again. And it's also not gonna work to consistently make the right wing the boogeymen. If you're not gonna have something positive to campaign on, don't get upset when voters are not persuaded to show up to the polls because Republicans are so scary. That did not work during the 2016 presidential campaign. It is not gonna work moving forward. If they're gonna campaign on these big promises, they need to deliver. And I'm sick of them lying and thinking that they can get away with it. Remember, it's the Democrats in charge right now, not Republicans. Democrats hold the levers of power and they're failing us again. And they only have themselves to blame. All right, well, why don't we move on to our next story?
Are you a politician with a ridiculous point to make? Are you in need of a petulant, outdated way to make it? Then you'll need one of my signs. Hi, I'm Simon Simonson of Simonson Signs. We'll take the stupid, over-the-top, meaningless allegory you have and put it on foam core. So maybe someone will notice your grandstanding. Because this is C-SPAN, and anything that's not people milling around in front of a running vote count is almost considered moderately entertaining. The bar is low, just like our prices. We've got plenty of designs. We also brought you Mike Lee's Tauntauns. They're tons of fun. What does this have to do with the Green New Deal? About as much as this other visual aid he used of Reagan on a T-Rex. Or is that a velociraptor? Who cares? Who the cares? No one gives a. Call us now at Simonson Signs. We'll make your stupid point stupidly for money today.
Viewers had asked for an interview with the TYT Lizard. Mr. Lizard. Oh, you changed colors today. Nice. I don't even know how you feel about us. Do you even like us?
Well, you guys made me this awesome house, so I'm kind of in your debt. I was found outside on the street, and you gave me a home. Granted, it was a really crappy home for a while, but then through the power of fundraising, I became a person who has a multi-level Trump-style mansion.
You do. By the way, you've never looked better, man. Normally, you're just green or just brown, but today you're in mid-lizard, right?
I'm not very smart. I'm a lizard, so I don't know how the science works. I guess this is just my mood. It's not every day that thresholds like this are broken. I'm just so excited. I can't contain my pigmentation.
And now you're showing it off.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never seen the lizard like this before.
The pandemic has been a lucrative time for America's billionaires, with a new report showing that the nearly 750 billionaires here in the United States have collectively increased their wealth to the tune of $1 trillion. You hear about all that fear mongering in regard to inflation. You hear about, the business community is really suffering. But when you scratch beneath the surface, as we should know by now, the individuals who are suffering the most are workers, whereas the investor class, the executive class, is doing pretty well for themselves. Let me give you the numbers. Their wealth rose from $4.1 trillion to $5.1 trillion over the 12 months that ended on December 31st. That wealth rise could fund half of the Democrats' proposed 10-year, roughly $2 trillion Build Back Better plan of social and environmental investments. That legislation has been shelved, by the way, meaning that it's dead, meaning that Democrats have completely given up on it because they never wanted to pass a social spending package. How's that working out for you, Pramila Jayapal? Head of the Progressive Caucus, apparently trusted Biden a little too much in delivering that social spending package. Seems like he didn't do that, right? Anyway, Tesla and SpaceX founder Elon Musk was easily the biggest wealth winner of 2021. His riches growing by over 3/4, or $118 billion to nearly $272 billion. I don't know, is that enough money? Maybe not. His single-year wealth gain alone would more than pay for the Build Back Better agenda. Its $109 billion plan to offer 6 years of free preschool for 6 million children included. And as some of you might know, Elon Musk loves to brag about the fact that, look at me, I'm gonna pay some taxes. I'm gonna pay so much in taxes, everyone. But why don't we actually look at the numbers? How much is he paying in taxes relative to the average American worker? Well, Musk has recently boasted about facing an $11 billion tax bill last year, some substantial part of which is going to the state of California. But even if it were all going to Uncle Sam, it would represent less than 10% of his $118 billion wealth gain in 2021. Average families, on the other hand, pay about 13%, meaning a higher percentage of their money toward federal taxes. So just let that sink in for a second. People who make far less income are paying a higher percentage of that income toward federal taxes. Well, this man, Elon Musk, who saw his wealth rise in 1 year to the tune of $118 billion, is complaining or making himself out to be some sort of hero because he's spending about 10% of those gains on federal taxes. Now, the rich don't get richer through innovation. Some do, but when we're talking about the billionaires who made a killing during the pandemic, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about individuals who saw their wealth climb as a result of the stock market and its ever-growing performance. So why don't we look at that and why the stock market has performed so well, even as the pandemic led to mass layoffs, even as the Great Recession took place, even as COVID-related shutdowns took place. How is it that businesses performed so well in the stock market when there was all this chaos in the economy? Well, stock buybacks might have something to do with that. Share buybacks hit a record high last year. Companies in the S&P 500, a market index which tracks the stock prices of 500 leading US companies, repurchased shares worth over $245 billion in the third quarter alone. That's just in 1 quarter. These exorbitant buybacks helped US stock market indices reach record peaks. The S&P 500 broke 67 records in 2021 and increased its value by 25%. And for those of you who are like, well, how does that work? You have the Federal Reserve injecting money into the economy. You know, they gotta provide liquidity to the banks and the corporations, right? And you know what they do with that money? They just buy shares of their own stocks. And remember, executive pay, the compensation package that executives are awarded with for their wonderful behavior, usually has stocks involved. So if the share prices go up, that means that the executive's compensation goes up. So they literally have a vested interest to take that money that's being injected into the economy by the Federal Reserve to artificially inflate the value of the shares for their companies. That's really what's happening here. That's why there's this massive disconnect between what we're seeing in the real economy and what's taking place in the stock market. This is another reason why the stock market is not a good indicator of how the economy is genuinely performing, because it is a house of cards, and the Federal Reserve has played a huge role in that. Now, thanks in part to cheap debt and quantitative easing, that's what I'm referring to here when I talk about the Federal Reserve's behavior. The working class is feeling this disconnect from how the stock market is performing and how inequality is really exploding in this country. This is one of the ways that inequality continues to grow. But don't worry. The individuals who have made the most money during the pandemic, the billionaires who only got richer, are very unlikely to be taxed on their earnings, because remember, we're talking about the majority of their newfound wealth coming from the stock market. And in order for them to get taxed on those gains, they need to sell those stocks, and oftentimes they don't. So under current law, none of that gain will ever be taxed unless the underlying assets are sold. Now, Democratic lawmakers like Senator Ron Wyden have proposed a billionaire tax to mitigate this. It's not gonna go anywhere because there are too many corporate Democrats who stand in the way of passing this type of legislation. But what would that have done? Wyden's billionaire's income tax would apply to capital gains rate a total of 23.8% on the highest income taxpayers to the billionaire's gain of slightly over $1 trillion. The tax would be due annually on easy to value assets like stocks, which comprise much of the growth in the billionaire wealth. Now, again, that legislation is unlikely to go anywhere, but one thing you should also keep in mind is despite all of this, despite all of the pain and suffering that the working class has experienced during this pandemic, and despite the fact that there is no conversation in Congress right now in regard to another round of stimulus for ordinary Americans, there are members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, who are now thinking about another round of stimulus for businesses. Let me give you those details. In recent weeks, the talks have been led by Senators Ben Cardin, a Democrat, and Roger Wicker, a Republican. The duo in mid-December cobbled together the outlines of a roughly $68 billion proposal, two of the people said, which could include a mix of new spending and a repurposing of some unused cash authorized under previous packages. So are there any other details about this proposal? It's in the works. Who would benefit from it? Again, it would not benefit ordinary working Americans. This is about helping businesses because that is the top priority in this country. That is at the top of mind for our members of Congress. The early efforts have focused primarily on authorizing billions of dollars to help an array of businesses, including restaurants, performance venues, gyms, and even minor league sports teams that face another potential blow to their already battered balance sheets as a result of the evolving pandemic. I think it's abundantly clear where the priorities lie among our lawmakers, among our within our system of government. It's clear that when it comes to something as simple as the federal government rolling out free COVID testing, it's laughable. It's laughable to the point where the White House press secretary will laugh in the face of a reporter who asks a simple question about that. But then after backlash, of course, the Biden administration announces, no, we'll dole out about 500,000 free COVID tests. But it took backlash for that. When it comes to stimulus for businesses, there's no question about, they're already working on it in Congress. They have shelved the Build Back Better agenda, the social spending agenda that would provide universal pre-K, that would provide assistance with childcare so mothers who are struggling right now with childcare would be able to go back to work. It would finally do something to legitimately tackle climate change. That, it's shelved, it's gone, okay? That bill is pretty much dead. Congress is already focusing on another round of stimulus for businesses, which look, some businesses have been battered by the pandemic. I wouldn't have a problem with that stimulus package that's being worked on right now. But it does say something, and it says something pretty harsh about our economic system and our political system, that the ordinary American worker is completely left behind. In fact, you have lawmakers across the country, both Democrats and Republicans, demanding that everyone go back to work, including remote workers. But, while we're all expected to, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, rugged individualism for the ordinary American worker, businesses need that federal aid. They need that help, and they always take priority. Because we're ruled by corporations, we're ruled by capitalist interests. This is how it always plays out. And we really need to question whether we're gonna continue dealing with this system that tells us that we absolutely have to vote for certain politicians every election cycle, only to get the middle finger as soon as they're in the positions of power that we elected them for. We gotta take a quick break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, including some international news involving elections in Brazil. One of my favorite stories of the day. Don't miss it. We'll be right back.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now.
7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years.
I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. It's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring them. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Anna Kasparian, and we're about to get to some international news. I wanted to give you guys an update on what's happening with the elections in Brazil. So let's get right to it. Sergio Moro, the right-wing judge in Brazil who imprisoned Jair Bolsonaro's political opponent, Lula da Silva, leading up to the 2018 presidential election, is now actually running against Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil. And I love it when bad guys fight. Let them fight. And I love the fact that this is actually increasing the chances of the leftist candidate, Lula da Silva, from winning. So Bolsonaro actually lost support from the majority of the country, and it has to do with a number of different things, including his own corruption, but also his response to the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the right worshipped Sergio Moro for his role as judge who put former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva behind bars on corruption charges. The popularity propelled Moro to high office as justice minister under far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, who won the 2018 election, but only after the front runner Lula was made ineligible by Moro's sham conviction. And I'll give you the details on why that conviction was a sham in just a moment. But why is Moro now running against Bolsonaro, the individual who he assisted in winning the 2018 election, the individual who named him as a justice minister under his administration? Well, what's going on here? Well, it turns out that Moro resigned from his post in the Bolsonaro government because of the fact that he was allegedly concerned with Bolsonaro undermining Moro. He was concerned that Bolsonaro was meddling in the ability of law enforcement to do its job. Now, there are more details on that in this video. Let's take a quick look at that.
Sergio Moro resigned as Brazil's justice minister. On live television, he accused President Jair Bolsonaro of political meddling in matters of law enforcement when he fired federal police chief Mauricio Valeixo the day before.
Unfortunately, there's no way for me to fulfill the commitment I made if I'm not able to do my job, if I'm not able to preserve the autonomy of the federal police to carry out its work.
Sergio Moro's resignation comes just over a week after President Bolsonaro fired his health minister, Luis Enrique Mandetta, signaling there could be more political turmoil still to come.
Now, Moro stepped down back in 2020, and ever since then, it seems that there's been a bit of a feud taking place between Bolsonaro and Moro. But I want to be clear about something. While Moro is presenting himself as some sort of anti-corruption warrior, someone who wants to protect the independence of law enforcement to do its job, do not make any mistakes about Moro's own corruption, his collusion with Bolsonaro in an effort to turn Lula da Silva into a political prisoner. And guess what? That conviction, that sham conviction, luckily fell apart. And as a result, his whole, I guess, persona as this anti-corruption individual is really no longer valid. And it's showing in some of the polling. Now, let me give you the details on what happened with that sham conviction. So the Supreme Court freed Lula and vacated Moro's ruling, determining that the judge acted with bias after The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald to be specific, revealed compromising secret chat logs showing illicit collusion between Moro and the prosecutors. This was prior to Glenn Greenwald losing his mind. But it was good reporting at the time. Now, attempts to revive the cases against Lula have subsequently been thrown out, leaving Moro's legacy damaged. It was yet another hit to Moro's credibility, which was decimated during his brief, controversial, and at times humbling, or humiliating, I should say, and at times humiliating tenure in the Bolsonaro government, culminating in an anticlimactic, acrimonious departure in 2020. And guess what? Moro quit working under Bolsonaro's government to work in Washington, D.C. What was he doing there? Well, following his high-paying consulting gig in Washington, and even work on behalf of an Israeli billionaire accused of corruption and rights abuses, Moro is now running for president himself. Isn't it funny how the guy who really presented himself as this anti-corruption warrior then ended up working as a consultant in DC? It is pretty amazing stuff, right? Now, Moro has made an effort to avoid any questions pertaining to his anti-corruption work, even going so far as to avoiding speaking to crowds during book signings and things like that. He avoids even the possibility of being ambushed by anyone who wants to ask him a tough question about his record. Now, while Brazil's mainstream media often ignores Lula or casts him in a negative light, Moro, unfortunately, suffers no shortage of glowing coverage despite his lackluster polling numbers and vague policy proposals. Moro was featured on the front page of the influential O Global newspaper once every 3 days. Other major newspapers, radio stations, and television networks were similarly attentive. And unfortunately, there has been little, if any, critical coverage of Moro's scandals. But while the media in Brazil, much like the media here in the United States, prefers this corrupt politician over a leftist like Lula da Silva, who lifted literally millions of people out of poverty, it doesn't seem like the media's coverage is working so far. Okay, so a little more information about him, and then I'll give you the update on where he stands in the current polling. Moro represents a part of Brazilian society, which includes a large share, according to The Intercept, of the media that does not accept Lula and is ashamed of its previous support for Bolsonaro. His strategy will be to try to sustain the character that was created for him, that anti-corruption character. I think this character is out of step with Brazil today, but it is a character that corresponds with many of the interests of some powerful groups in Brazil. And that's according to a Brazilian studies professor over at the University of Oklahoma. And so where does everything stand today with this election, with this race? Well, facing off against both his far more charismatic arch nemesis, though, the former judge is struggling to break into double digits in polling. Awesome. The resurgent Lula, on the other hand, is ascendant, polling at nearly 50% with the lowest negative numbers of any major candidate. For his part, Bolsonaro, battered by an ailing economy and his administration's disastrous handling of COVID-19, is only managing to attract, oh, so sad, just over 20% of voters. And so the voting for this election is scheduled to take place in October of this year. As we know, a lot can happen in 10 months, so we'll see how this all plays out. But things are looking great for Lula da Silva. And remember, he was made a political prisoner by Sergio Moro, and things seemed incredibly dire for him. But luckily, there was excellent reporting that outed Moro as someone who colluded to make Lula da Silva, political prisoner, and all of those charges have completely fallen apart. That conviction has fallen apart. And to be sure, among the people of Brazil, Lula does command quite a bit of popularity, not only because of the fact that he is untouched by the disgusting behavior that we're seeing by both Bolsonaro and Moro, but more importantly, because he did in fact lift millions of Brazilians out of poverty when he once led the country. And I think that stability, that economic growth that happened under his watch and under his leftist policies really does reign supreme and really does send a message in this election. Hopefully that message remains, and hopefully the people of Brazil make the right choice here. Because I will say this, Bolsonaro has been a complete and utter disaster for the country, and even his supporters, his most avid supporters, have realized that. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got more news for you all, including that massive traffic jam that happened in Virginia. Apparently, the solution, according to Fox News, is giving police more weapons to deal with snowstorm-related traffic jams. What? We've got that story and more when we come back.
I've been at TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for like, political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watch the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring him. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
In the house, like LL Cool J in our Twitch audience has gifted 20 subs, so special thanks to you for doing that. I love it when I get gifted subs, so I know that the recipients of those subs are gonna be super grateful for it. And for those of you who are curious about our Twitch community and our Twitch channel, you can check it out over at twitch.tv/TYT. If you have a Prime membership, you can actually get a free subscription to our Twitch channel through that. So definitely check it out. And special thanks again to In the House like LL Cool J. All right, let's get to one of the craziest stories, one of the craziest commentaries on the winter storm that took place in Virginia recently. Drivers in Virginia were stuck on the Interstate 95 for literally a day. More than 20 hours stuck on an icy road with no food and very little help. Luckily, most people ended up being okay. There were some deaths as a result of this crazy snowstorm that took place. But Fox would have you believe that the real problem, the real issue that transpired was the fact that police departments and state police in Virginia aren't getting enough military-grade equipment to deal with these kinds of disasters. I'm not even kidding. But before we get to that insane video, and you do not want to miss it, I need to give you some context into what happened. What happened with this massive traffic jam as a result of this massive snowstorm? Well, a 40-mile stretch, according to the New York Times, a 40-mile stretch of the highway, one of the busiest travel corridors in the United States, came to a standstill overnight after a fast-falling snowstorm led to jackknifed tractor trailers and hundreds of other accidents. Some people abandoned their cars. Many, including Senator Tim Kaine, spent the night on the snowy highway. In fact, Senator Kaine spent more than 20 hours in his vehicle, in his car. He said that he left his car on for 30 minutes at a time to charge his phone, make calls, and also warm up. Then turned it off to save gas and to sleep for 20 minutes or so, only to be wakened by the cold. When he wasn't napping, Kane said he passed the time by sipping Dr. Pepper. I do like Dr. Pepper, if I do say so myself. Listening to Sirius XM radio and eating small wedges of an orange that another stranded driver had given him. Remember, people are not expecting to be stranded on the Interstate 95. So most people don't have food, they don't have water. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible situation. And obviously this is in the middle of a snowstorm where it's incredibly cold. Now, he said that he regretted his habit of skipping breakfast. He also apparently said that the snowstorm ended up being much worse than everyone had expected. And that's why there was a lack of preparedness in regard to this snowstorm. So as the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, said, we were prepared for the storm that was predicted, a few inches of snow. But instead, Mother Nature sent more than a foot of snow to the Fredericksburg area. And people, unfortunately, did die. Just to give you what we know so far in regard to people who were harmed as a result of this winter storm, authorities around the mid-Atlantic said the storm had caused at least 5 deaths. 2 women and a man died after their vehicle collided with a snowplow, according to the Montgomery County Police Department. Local news outlets in Tennessee and Georgia reported that a child in each state had died after trees fell onto their homes. Now, when it came to that massive traffic jam, cars and trucks slowed, then stopped on their way up and down hills. At least one tractor trailer slid sideways across the highway. In some places, 4 inches of ice froze underneath vehicles. So since officials didn't expect the snowstorm to be as severe as it was just this terrible, chain of events. It started off with rain. The rain then turned to sleet on the roads and on the interstate, which meant that it was incredibly dangerous to drive. Cars were slipping and sliding. And then after that, they received snowfall at a rate of 2 inches an hour for 4 to 5 hours. Now, that explanation, by the way, apparently wasn't good enough for the fine folks over at Fox, where Dana Perino wanted to blame this mess on something totally different. Let's watch.
I talked to a state legislator there in Virginia, and he pointed out to me that in the last several years, many on the left made a decision that local sheriffs should not be allowed to have military-grade equipment. Right? Because they said that that was a bad symbol and that it was too militaristic and authoritarian. But imagine if they were still allowed to have the equipment that they had just a few years ago, it probably would have come in very helpful today.
What? I mean, what are the cops supposed to do? Like shoot the ice? Shoot the snow? Like what is she even talking about? And to be clear, police departments in the state of Virginia have continued to receive quite a bit of the military weaponry that our Defense Department has a surplus of because we spend so much on defense spending to basically funnel money over to private defense contractors and weapons manufacturers who keep making more and more equipment, more and more weaponry, which the Defense Department has such a huge surplus on, they don't know what to do with it. So they hand it over to local police departments, which then leads to the militarization of local police departments. But let's look at what's really going on here, because what she said there was a complete and utter lie. First of all, the notion that we need more military grade equipment to deal with snowstorms is already ridiculous on its face. So, I mean, we can just dismiss her ridiculous argument there alone. But let's even go further and debunk the nonsense that she just spewed there in regard to what local police departments are receiving or are not receiving from our Defense Department. So, transfers of military gear to police departments, and I'm specifically talking about Virginia here, from $767,000 armored cars designed to survive mines to night vision equipment to the backpack soldiers take into combat, ballooned meaning they increased, ballooned in Virginia and in Hampton Roads in 2019 alone. Statewide transfers of military gear to police and sheriff's officers more than doubled to $3.8 million. So what is she talking about? I really don't understand like where she's, well, actually I do understand one thing. There's one thing that local police departments in Virginia stopped receiving as of 2012. And it's specifically military grade weaponry. Okay, but let's give you more details on what they are receiving through our Defense Department, through our military, to essentially police American citizens, right? I mean, why are we in favor of militarized police? Why do we need police departments to have tanks and, I mean, essentially equipment that's meant to withstand mines? That's insane. In Hampton, or the Hampton Police Sheriff's Office acquired the armored car for disaster response, such as to transport people or supplies during a natural disaster, and to safely transport personnel if called to respond to a situation such as an active shooter, according to a spokeswoman for the department. Okay, great, so it turns out that they actually do have some of that equipment that would apparently be tasked with helping out in these types of disastrous situations. Apparently didn't really work that well, did it? But there is one thing, again, the weapons that local police departments stopped receiving as of 2012, a longtime staple of the military's grants to law enforcement. Rifles, most recently M16s, haven't been transferred since 2012. Is that what Perino's talking about? Is that what she's so salty about? That the local police departments in Virginia stopped receiving military grade weaponry after 2012? Is that? And exactly how would those kinds of weapons help with a traffic jam that's caused by an unexpected winter storm? I'm just curious. The American people want to know, or at least anyone with 2 brain cells would like to know. This is just another way to protect a system that consistently redistributes wealth from the bottom to the top, redistributes our tax money, our resources, which, our federal lawmakers will tell us it's finite, very precious resources. That's why they can't pass a social spending package, right? Why are we taking taxpayer money and pumping it into the defense industry? Year after year, the National Defense Authorization Act increases in the dollar amount allocated to the Defense Department with no questions asked. It is a bipartisan effort. And the only reason why that happens is so we can keep funneling money to defense contractors and weapons manufacturers. And that leads to the surplus that I was talking about earlier. All these weapons that the Defense Department does not know what to do with, they have so much of it that they look to pawn it off to local police departments. And Dana Perino loves that, totally supportive of that. I don't know how that has anything to do with mitigating the severity of a winter storm that leads to an insane traffic jam like the one people living in Virginia experienced on the I-95. But look, at the end of the day, just read in between the lines. This isn't about solutions. This isn't about helping stranded Americans. This is about protecting a system of profits for defense contractors. That's all this is. It's just so transparent and so pathetic. So again, anytime you hear anyone on Fox News claim that they're so concerned about spending in government, oh my God, all the overwhelming spending by our federal government, unacceptable. Okay, great, can we cut the defense budget? No, we can't do that. Dana Perino, not in favor of that. I mean, to use a tragic snowstorm-related event in Virginia to try to protect the profits of defense contractors and weapons manufacturers is just incredible. But it is Fox News, so I wouldn't expect anything less.
Are you a politician with a ridiculous point to make? Are you in need of a petulant, outdated way to make it? Then you'll need one of my signs. Hi, I'm Simon Simonson of Simonson Signs. We'll take the stupid over-the-top meaningless allegory you have and put it on foam core. So maybe someone will notice your grandstanding, because this is C-SPAN, and anything that's not people milling around in front of a running vote count is almost considered moderately entertaining. The bar is low, just like our prices. We've got plenty of designs. We also brought you Mike Lee's Tauntauns. They're tons of fun. What does this have to do with the Green New Deal? About as much as this other visual aid he used of Reagan on a T-Rex. Or is that a velociraptor? Who cares? Who the cares? No one gives a. Call us now at Simon Simonson Signs. We'll make your stupid point stupidly for money today.
Viewers had asked for an interview with the TYT lizard. Mr. Lizard. Oh, you changed colors today. Nice. I don't even know how you feel about us. Do you even like us?
Well, you guys made me this awesome house, so I'm kind of in your debt. I was found outside on the street, and you gave me a home. Granted, it was a really crappy home for a while, but then through the power of fundraising, I became a person who has a multi-level Trump-style mansion.
You do. By the way, you never looked better, man. Normally, you're just green or just brown, but today you're in mid-lizard, right?
I'm not very smart. I'm a lizard, so I don't know how the science works. I guess this is just my mood. It's not every day that thresholds like this are broken. I'm just so excited. I can't contain my pigmentation.
And now you're showing it off.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never seen the lizard like this before.
There was a severe snowstorm, an unexpected snowstorm in Virginia, which led to a massive 40-mile-long traffic jam on the Interstate 95. That traffic jam lasted for nearly a full day, okay, more than 20 hours. People were stranded on the interstate. And Kamala Harris decided to put out a tweet that seemed to be a little disconnected from that reality. So what was the tweet? Because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, America is moving again. That's what infrastructure is all about, getting people moving. I don't know if the people on her team are trolling her. I don't know if they despise her and they want to make her look completely out of touch with what's happening in reality. But let's put the snowstorm aside for a second. Obviously, maybe think about what's happening in the news that day before you put that tweet out, obviously. I think that's easy commentary. But let's also acknowledge the fact that the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which passed not too long ago, has not really been implemented yet. Infrastructure projects take years. What are you talking about when you say that the infrastructure bill America's moving again? What? Okay, can you point to a single infrastructure project that's really taken off? That's really getting America moving again? Can you point to a bridge that's been repaired? I mean, it's just so ridiculous. But it goes to a broader issue with the Democratic Party. They have failed to actually deliver on many of their promises, including the social spending package that was decoupled from the physical infrastructure. The physical infrastructure bill, which did pass Congress, received the support of corporations and, of course, also received the support of Republican lawmakers who have corporate donors who absolutely salivate at the thought of government grants to basically increase their own profits while doing, in my opinion, not such a great job in regard to improving the infrastructure. The corporate infrastructure bill, it's the only thing that the Democratic Party can point to as a win, as a major, campaign talking point. And Americans are not going to feel the benefits of that bipartisan infrastructure bill immediately, if there are any benefits that they will feel eventually. I mean, there are some downsides to that bill, as we've talked about on the show as well, including the fact that it makes paves the way for public infrastructure to be privatized, which means that corporations who will now control that infrastructure can implement all sorts of tolls and fees as Americans commute to and from work. But it's just laughable because they're so desperate to find anything to make it appear as though they have accomplished something during Biden's tenure, during the time that Democrats have held the levers of power. But Americans aren't stupid. And so she really posted an L with that tweet on two different fronts. Number one, showing how out of touch she is with what's happening in America, what's happening in the news that very day. But also more importantly, by making it abundantly clear that Democrats don't have much to brag about. So they brag about a corporate loved bipartisan infrastructure bill. Cool. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, John Iadarola will be joining me for the second hour, where we will talk about, the anti-cancel culture Republicans in Florida arresting demonstrators because they don't like answering tough questions. We've got that story and more when we come back.
Patience. It's a virtue. They think you can put me in a box. But you can't stifle a revolution. Cenk Uygur, you started something, an idea. The truth and honesty matter above all else. And the people love you for it. And for a while, so did I. We could have stood united, a political force of reckoning upon our foes, the hypocrites, the phonies, the unjust. But you put me in this box.
Cenk! No!
You began without me. You began without me. But God as my witness, I will be the one to finish it.
They did 100 squats a day for 30 days straight. I was like, how hard can that be? That doesn't sound very hard. So I'm gonna try to do this for 30 days and see if there's any difference in my physique.
3 weeks later.
Steve, how is your exercise regimen coming along with your squats?
I did 100, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
You're pacing yourself.
Yeah.
When news is breaking, and when you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time. When news breaks, when news is breaking, and you like. When news is breaking, and you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time for Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich. This is Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich.
Welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian and John Iadarola with you. John is working remotely, which New York City Mayor Eric Adams is not pleased with, John. But we'll talk about that in greater detail for our members-only bonus episode.
In this case, I think it's okay. It's low skill stuff that I'm doing here. So
I can't wait to talk about that story because apparently a bunch of lawmakers have a problem with people who are working during the pandemic. They're not doing shutdowns, they're working, but they're not working in commercial buildings, which I'm sure the landlords of those commercial buildings are not too happy about. So they want to make remote workers go back to work in office, in person. For no reason, Anyway, we'll get to those details in the bonus episode. If you're not a member, please become one, tyt.com/join. That'll be a great conversation. For now though, John, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's taking place in Florida. This was a first hour story that we didn't get to, but I'm sure you have thoughts about it as well. So without further ado, let's get to it. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is apparently not a fan of tough questions. He loves the admiration, he loves the cheering fans, but if there are any constituents who are concerned about his proposed policies or the direction he is headed in regard to the coronavirus pandemic, he will arrest them. I'm not even kidding. That is literally what happened recently during a press conference for Ron DeSantis. Now, this all took place as activists had shown up to the press conference to ask DeSantis about a whole litany of issues, including his policies on critical race theory and his recent rhetoric on anti-COVID testing. And here is one of the activists, Ben Frazier to be exact, who wanted to hold DeSantis, his governor, accountable.
Please go ahead with your news conference.
But we can't do that until we've asked you to leave. So why
do we have to leave? It's a public building.
Because we're having a private press conference.
A private press conference with a public official?
We don't allow the members of the public to come to the press conference.
Let me just get this straight.
Yeah.
You're having a private news conference with a public official on
we don't
public
allow members
property.
of the public to come to our press conferences. This is for members of the media with the elected officials. They have the conversation. If we want to have a separate conversation that you guys want to have.
Well, here's my question to you. Here's my question.
What about the press conferences
What
he's
about?
had at schools where he's had the whole school there and other places where he's had his people
for
around
security
for
reasons,
him?
we know who those people are.
So
We
there's
know
a question. Is there a question regarding security?
There is
Would you like my ID?
security. So if we can move everyone out of the press conference.
I think Ben Frazier makes a lot of great points in that brief video, especially in regard to a public space, a press conference regarding public officials and the decisions that they make, which of course impact the lives of constituents of Florida. And the fact that certain people get, I don't know, canceled, maybe that's a good word. The type of people whose free speech gets trampled on just because that speech is not favored or preferred by Republican lawmakers in the state of Florida. I think it's all really fascinating stuff, especially since, they've really presented themselves, John, as people who are against cancel culture, people who are in favor of free speech, who really value the ability for Americans to speak out and to hold people in positions of power accountable, to hold the elite accountable. It's curious that the governor's office made the decision to first try to kick out these activists and then later, as I'll show you, arrest them for refusing to leave.
Yeah, clearly censorship. What we just saw in that video was that man was shadow banned by that aide, and yet the people who make a career out of talking about this stuff aren't gonna care at all about that. I like that they're trying to put pressure on DeSantis, knowing, and I'm sure they know, that they're not gonna get him to change what he's doing. He's not doing it because it makes sense. He's doing, all of his actions are chosen because he believes it's gonna raise his profile. He's not thinking at all about Florida, about being governor. All of this is, hey, maybe Trump doesn't run in 2024, and then I guess it's gonna be me. That's all it's about. And he has been terrible when it comes to topics like the pandemic, the response to the pandemic. And by that I mean the public health response, but basically everything having to do with it from the beginning. And he's only gotten worse over time. He's done. He's not going to do literally anything. He doesn't care how many cases there are. Florida is being devoured by COVID right now. I'm impressed that he was having a press conference. And I believe I saw he had some sort of weird thing that happened at that press conference. The news is still breaking on that. At least he's appearing. That's novel. I like it when our elected officials do like a little wink and a nod to the fact that we're supposedly a democracy, but he can do basically whatever he wants. Despite the fact, I'm gonna remind you really fast, he became governor back in 2018 and running against Andrew Gillum. And I looked it up because I remembered it being a close race. More than 8 million votes were cast, 8.1 million votes were cast. He won by 30,000 votes. Wow. It was the closest gubernatorial election. And that was in 2018, long before we thought that something like a pandemic could happen. And think about how consequential that difference was, that 30,000 votes. Not just that, he's gonna resign Florida to slowly sink into the ocean, and he doesn't care at all about democracy, allowing people to vote and all of that, but everything having to do with the pandemic, how different the response could have been if an election had gone slightly differently back in 2018. Yeah, I actually, I remember the election being a close one, but I didn't realize that it was only 30,000 votes, and you're right about that. I mean,
clearly there would be a different response to many different things, including the pandemic, if we had someone else in office in Florida. But it is also fascinating because, look, Ron DeSantis has really leaned in on these Trump-like talking points and the manufactured culture wars, especially as it pertains to this drummed up nonsense about critical race theory in elementary schools and things like that. But he also, in the middle of another COVID surge, has advocated to limit COVID testing. And we'll get to that in a second, but that's the thing that really boggles my mind, okay? And it was among the many things that these activists wanted to ask him questions about, but he doesn't want questions. He doesn't want to be challenged. He wants these press conferences to be publicity stunts, meant to just help him politically, help him get his message out to individuals who are likely to support him if he does choose to run as president in 2024. But I do want to get to what happened later, because as I mentioned, Ben Frazier, he's, by the way, also a disabled activist and the president of the North Side Coalition of Jacksonville. He, was actually being pretty polite. Like, he wasn't being rowdy. He was just saying, he was making great points there. I'm, obviously a constituent here. We're in a public space. This is a public official. And they kind of refused to give him any real answers for why he and other activists were getting kicked out. And then later, he gets arrested. And we have that video as well. Let's take a look.
Why am I being handcuffed?
Mr. Frazier,
I have not done anything to anyone.
Frazier,
Why am I being handcuffed?
Mr. Frazier, please.
Why am I being handcuffed? Why am I being handcuffed, Sergeant Terrell?
Right now. You got it. Come on, let's walk.
I asked a question. Why am I being handcuffed? Am I being arrested? Am I being arrested? I'm asking a question.
You're being detained.
Patience. It's a virtue. They think you can put me in a box. But you can't stifle a revolution. Cenk Uygur, you started something, an idea. The truth and honesty matter above all else. And the people love you for it. And for a while, so did I. We could have stood united, a political force of reckoning upon our foes, the hypocrites, the phonies, the unjust. But you put me in this box.
Jake! No!
You began without me. You began without me. But God as my witness, I will be the one to finish it.
They did 100 squats a day for 30 days straight. I was like, how hard can that be? That doesn't sound very hard. So I'm gonna try to do this for 30 days and see if there's any difference in my physique.
3 weeks later.
Steve, how is your exercise regimen coming along with your squats?
I did 100, 100, 100, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
You're pacing yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
When news is breaking, and when you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time. When news breaks, when news is breaking, and you like. When news is breaking, and you need Brett Ehrlich, it's time for Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich. This is Breaking News with Brett Ehrlich.
John, could you, for the audience, just juxtapose what we just saw with this activist, Ben Frazier, to what we experienced nearly a year ago? It'll be a 1-year anniversary tomorrow in the nation's capital. Because if I recall correctly, there's a lot of outrage over the treatment of the pro-Trump insurrectionists who got arrested as they were storming the Capitol and causing all sorts of damage. But I feel like that situation was a little different from what we experienced here with Ben Frazier, just a little bit, right?
There were. The activist that you just showed that video of obviously was far more insidious because he didn't have like what you should do is when you're going to attempt to, I don't know, what was he gonna do? He's gonna rough up Ron DeSantis or something. You should at least wear horns or poop on the floor. That way people know who you are. He was much more like a spy or a ninja because it was much more subtle. Obviously, he was there to do something incredibly illegal and dangerous. I mean, that goes without saying, except I'm gonna say it anyway. No, the whole thing is ridiculous. He kept repeating over and over, why am I being handcuffed? And they eventually said he's being detained. I don't even know what that means. I assume he was arrested. In any event, he's being handcuffed and detained because they don't think there will be any public image or political price to pay for it. And in fact, for most right wingers, if they see an activist being led away in handcuffs from a DeSantis event, that's like a net positive for him. The fact that he's a black activist, even more so. Like this is the sort of disgusting calculus that they're doing that we need to be aware of. This doesn't hurt him to do that. If there were 1,000 protesters and he'd had the cops come in and tear gas it, that would look good for him too. His base is fundamentally anti-democratic. They want to see people's rights being violated in this way.
Right, while simultaneously pretending as if they don't want people's rights to be violated, pretending as though they're against cancel culture, they want to protect the First Amendment. I mean, when push comes to shove, as long as it has to do with their political opponents, they have no problem. No problems at all with those rights being eroded. And look, you're right. If only they had defecated on the floor, then they would have come across as pleasant tourists rather than anything insidious. Now, I want to also give you some statements from both Ben Fraser and the activist. Ben Fraser said this, and I think he's absolutely right. The governor is afraid to meet with the people. When it comes to public welfare, this governor does not care. He does not want to meet with this public. He wants to run away. And I also want to be clear about one other thing. I don't agree with any politician, regardless of their political ideology, regardless of their political affiliation, doing what Ron DeSantis did to these demonstrators, to these constituents of Florida who wanted to ask him questions about his own policy. If you are a politician, an elected official, especially if you are in a leadership role like governor of Florida, you should feel proud of your policies, no? You should feel ready and willing to answer any questions, to defend and stand up in favor of the policies that you've championed. Why is it that Ron DeSantis is so afraid of that? Another demonstrator said this: I want to talk to the governor about his policies regarding the pandemic, regarding critical race theory, regarding House Bill 1. One of the protesters responded, referencing an anti-riot law pushed by DeSantis, and calling it an anti-riot law is essentially doing DeSantis's dirty work for him. Essentially, these are policies, these are laws that punish peaceful demonstrators, and the way that they get it passed is by essentially marketing it as an anti-riot law. In reality, these are the kinds of policies that we've seen both proposed and passed across the country that would provide immunity for drivers who run over protesters and things like that. So I think those are legitimate questions to have, but of course, Ron DeSantis probably doesn't feel so proud about those policies since he's unwilling to answer any questions about them.
Yeah, and doesn't feel that he has to.
Exactly.
That is really the issue. It ties into every single thing that we talk about. The incentives are not there for accountability, for feeling that, again, if your base isn't interested in you being representative or kind or decent or rational or sane, if they don't demand those things, then you don't even need to pretend at public events like this. And so he is not pretending.
The other part of the First Amendment that's super valuable to a democracy is freedom of press. And I also found it fascinating that the woman that you saw in the video who was telling the demonstrators to leave wanted to control what the media was doing as everything was unfolding. After the group said that they would not leave, a woman who said that she was with the governor's office told them that they were being inappropriate, they weren't being appropriate, and asked the media, asked the journalists to stop recording the group and instead prepare for the news conference. Oh, nice, government officials telling the press what they can and can't do. Please don't do any reporting here. please serve as specific PR agents for the governor. And finally, I have to get to this one last part because I do think it's super relevant. Ron DeSantis is apparently frustrated at the fact that people are getting tested for coronavirus. It's very Trumpian. Let's hear his argument.
That's where we want the testing to go. I mean, as Joe said, you do have people when the kind of the hysteria gets going, you'll have certain people that will go out and will just get tested all the time at some of these sites, and that's not a good use of resources. And so he's going to put out guidance that talks about some of the examples where it makes sense, where it doesn't.
You know what? I agree. That's excellent line of thinking. If I feel a lump in my breast, I'm not going to go check it out because what if I find new information that I'm not happy about? What if I panic about it? I just want to avoid panic, So no testing. And what kind of stupid thought process was that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a demonstration of the fundamental premise of don't look up. So don't get tested. That's what it is. Look, their strategy from almost the very beginning has been herd immunity. That's one thing they call it many things. The idea is don't stop people from getting sick. Just let everyone get sick and really hope that, aside from the obvious cost of that, which is insane loss of life, millions of people with long COVID, hospitals overwhelmed, people needlessly dying. Okay, they don't care about that. So they set that aside. Hopefully the immunity that you get from your previous infection is permanent, because then at least herd immunity lets us get past it. Of course, we're finding out that that's not actually true, that immunity does wane. So it's not only in the moment an insane strategy, fundamentally immoral, it also isn't going to work. The issue with pursuing that strategy, of course, aside from the needless loss of life, the catastrophic historic human suffering, is that if you just let everyone get sick and you're testing, it's gonna look terrible for you. And so like with Donald Trump, this is just the same thing as what we experienced in the fall of 2020. Take actions and give statements that encourage people to get sick, and then do what you can to stop the testing from detecting the obvious inevitable consequences of what you're pushing for. And so we had that nationally with Trump, and now we have that with Ron DeSantis, in his own words right there, coming up with this straw man of a person who needlessly goes out and gets tested 1,000 times. Does that seem sane to you? Does that seem representative? Obviously not, but for a conservative, it'll make them feel better. And he chose his Surgeon General specifically because, like with Scott Atlas, he supports as many people getting sick immediately as possible and covering it up by dismantling the testing infrastructure.
Yeah. It's incredibly frustrating, especially when you consider how their own disinformation on so many different fronts, whether it has to do with testing or just simply getting the vaccine, has needlessly led to more people dying, has led to, I mean, they talk about the economy, like they care about the economy so much. You care about the economy, encourage people to get vaccinated. That way, people aren't so afraid to go to work, right? We see hospitals that are already overwhelmed again, thanks to this new variant, but they're not overwhelmed with vaccinated patients. They're overwhelmed with unvaccinated patients. And who did that? Why are they unvaccinated? And we have a shortage of monoclonal antibodies, something that Ron DeSantis and Texas Governor Greg Abbott are complaining about nonstop. The need for monoclonal antibodies would be diminished considerably if you just convince people to get vaccinated. But they can't do it because it's their, it's a little political culture war.
Yeah, and they've been encouraged that that is the solution. Just get sick and take it. Oh, oops, now we need to buy way more. And that's like the most expensive way you can deal with this.
Exactly.
But again, they're the ones that are fighting back against big pharma and all that. It's just that the inevitable outcome of their strategy is giving maximal amounts of money to those corporations.
Well, we got to take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the GOP. They be cooing. We've got those details and more.
I've been a fan of TYT, I believe, for the last 6 years.
5 years.
3 years now. 7 years.
4 years now.
2.5 years. I just started because she got me into it.
My boyfriend actually watches it every morning and every night, so I kind of just started watching it with him, and I love it. I mean, it's the only way that I find my news.
Looking through YouTube, looking for like, political shows that look cool.
I came across a very angry rant from Cenk, and that's when I knew.
So I was immediately in love with the show.
And then I haven't missed a live show since then.
10 times a day, I watched the show in the morning.
Whenever I had a bad day at high school, Young Turks.
Man, Cenk is just so blunt and honest, and I love the honesty, and there's no BS behind the news, and they just tell everything like it is.
There's nobody censoring him. There's nobody there to say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That feel of authenticity makes it seem like what they're saying is true.
I feel like I get the real story from the Young Turks.
I am TYT.
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 Breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. This is Brett Ehrlich with breaking news with Brett Ehrlich. Bernie Sanders wants to break Wall Street, and he wants to break it real bad.
Our system is inherently rigged against the will of the people.
They have 50% of the vote, and in a democracy, they should have 50% of the seats.
But if you live in an insanely gerrymandered district, your vote functionally doesn't matter.
We drew the map in a way that even though we get 50% of the vote, we're gonna get 13 out of the 18 seats.
You don't actually have the ability to translate the will of the voters in your area into actual government policy.
They should not be allowed to gerrymander these districts. We should actually have a democracy.
Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and John Iadarola with you. John Iadarola hosts The Damage Report over here at TYT Network, so definitely check that out. In fact, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, I will be on The Damage Report with John to cover the 1-year anniversary of the Capitol riots. So definitely check that out. It'll be a good conversation.
Should be a good show. Yeah, hopefully nothing happening in relation to that we have to cover, but it should be a good show either way. But we'll see, fingers crossed.
Yes, exactly. Renee Lamore in our super chat section writes in and says, I wanted to tell you, Anna, that I enjoyed the bonus episode last night. And it was pretty damn good, if I do say so myself. I have a cat now and have also owned a dog. I think your dog, Charlie, is cute. Some of you who aren't members are probably wondering, like, what? Did Anna share amazingly cute videos of her dog, Charlie? I did. Maybe you should be a member and you should check it out. It was a fun show. Yeah, and I did so in the context of an insane story involving cats in South Korea that are setting fires. It's real.
Yeah,
like they're setting
it's a
fires.
menace. They're gonna kill everyone.
They've set more than 100 fires in recent years. So,
I know.
All right. So let's move on to our next story. This is a pretty big one involving Sean Hannity. He's implicated in this January 6th investigation. So the January 6th committee has revealed even more text messages from Fox host Sean Hannity, text messages that he sent to Mark Meadows in the days leading up to the January 6th Capitol riots. Now, those text messages seem to indicate that Hannity might have known what was to come. Now, we've told you about some of the text messages that Hannity had sent during the Capitol riots, where he's urging Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, to do something to encourage Trump to end the violence. But now we have more details. Now, Trump's change of plans, by the way, in regard to giving a speech on the 1-year anniversary of the Capitol riots, comes after the special congressional committee investigating the insurrection released a series of text messages from Fox News host Sean Hannity, who texted then White House chief of staff Mark Meadows his concerns over the violence at the Capitol and raised doubts on Trump's election fraud claims. So the newly revealed texts in question say the following. We can't lose the entire White House counsel's office, Hannity wrote to Meadows on December 31st, 2020. And he also wrote, I did not see January 6th happening the way he is being told, meaning the way that Trump is being told. He should announce will lead the nationwide effort to reform voting integrity. Go to Florida and watch Joe mess up daily. Stay engaged. When he speaks, people will listen. So even leading up to the riots, Sean Hannity was trying to get Donald Trump to stop with the election lies, and also let's be real, to stop inciting people in regard to January 6th, because Trump's incitements didn't just happen during the rally that preceded the Capitol riots on that day. He had been spreading disinformation and nonsense about voter fraud for weeks. And even Sean Hannity, his ally, this right-wing Fox News conservative, was trying to get him to stop. And so now the select committee investigating the Capitol riots is requesting that Sean Hannity answer some questions. They have not subpoenaed him, which I disagree with. I think they should subpoena him. But they are asking him to tap into his patriotism, do the right thing, and cooperate with this investigation, which I believe is very unlikely to happen. But John, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Actually, I want your thoughts on something. So for a solid week, we have the night before texts of his fears about what's going to happen on January 6th, and perhaps more importantly, we have that New Year's Eve one where he says it's not going to go the way you think, and he even gives advice for what he thinks Trump should do rather than talking about the election. I have several ideas as to why I think Sean Hannity was saying that. Why do you think Sean Hannity was pushing Trump to not go in that direction, the direction that he did eventually go in, and not only encouraging this mob, but also encouraging the idea that Congress can overturn the results of the election?
Honestly, I know I can speculate, but I don't really know what was in his mind. I never think that people like Sean Hannity want to do the right thing to avoid dismantling our democracy. Like, I don't think he actually cares about that. Again, I'm speculating. This is what I think. There has to be some other self-serving reason. But what do you think?
I think that there's a couple different reasons. It could be maybe ideologically he's not actually as insane as some of them. Sean Hannity could be a guy who plays up how radical he is, to maintain an audience. But as I talked about on TDR this morning, he's an incredibly wealthy guy who's been wealthy and influential for many years. All of that has come to him under the status quo, the political and media status quo of the last 10 to 20 years. He probably doesn't stand to gain by insane things happening, the overthrow of the government, the damage that might do to Wall Street, the uncertainty for future elections. I think he knows that he's going to be perfectly fine and continue to make millions of dollars if they just let Biden get in. They can spend the next 4 years criticizing him insanely, and then almost inevitably a Republican's going to beat him the next time around anyway. I think he'd be happy for Trump to be in office. I don't think that he needs Trump to be in office for him to do well in terms of his career, in terms of his his pocketbook.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And as you were sharing that theory, I couldn't help but think about all of the Wall Street investors, all of the corporate CEOs, all of these businesses that claimed that they would stop giving campaign contributions to Republicans who refused to certify the election results on January 6th. They then turned around, and recent reporting from the Daily Poster makes this clear. They decided to continue donating money to these Republican politicians. So the very people who aided and abetted Donald Trump and aided and abetted what happened on that day are continuing to receive money from Wall Street, from corporations, from corporate donors. And yeah, I mean, look, I think there's truth to what you're saying, but what also kind of blows my mind is the thought that Sean Hannity thinks that he can have somewhat of a saner ideology behind the scenes while spewing insane propaganda on his show on a nightly basis, which radicalizes his audience and literally has led to a huge portion of the Republican Party believing that the election was in fact stolen from Donald Trump when there's absolutely no evidence of that.
Yeah, I think that this is sort of an extreme example of something that we've talked about for some time. Is that is the game that they're playing, and at the end of 2020, especially, it looked like it was going really poorly for them in that they were amplifying the election lies on top of the COVID and the COVID lies and the beginning of the lies about vaccines, and you're right, it had radicalized people, insanely so. And then it looked like people were changing over to watching Newsmax or OAN because they were willing to say crazier things. I think that is a tightrope that they've been walking for a long time. They have to be the most radical right-wingers to maintain that audience, not just to get them watching them, but to keep them like revved up constantly. Like the right doesn't drop off after an election in terms of watching Fox News in the same way that so-called centrists do for CNN and MSNBC. They're kept constantly at a boiling point. But they also want stability. Sean Hannity is a wealthy guy. Things are working for him right now. And that's largely true for all of them, including the corporate overlords of the network itself, let alone the hosts. And so that's a tightrope that they have to walk. They have to, sell, fascist revolution to their base, but maintain a safe, stable business environment where they can continue to make money.
Yeah, well, we'll see how all of this plays out. It seems as though Sean Hannity is going to find a way to skirt any involvement with this investigation. He's already putting together a free speech argument to provide cover for not following through or for refusing to cooperate with the investigation. He's not going to cooperate, and he's terrified of any type of backlash he might receive, both from Donald Trump and his supporters. But we'll see how it plays out. But I did want to get to one other element to this story. Let me reset for it because I thought this conversation on Ari Melber's show was pretty fascinating.
You are the media and you are much needed.
TYT! TYT!
Your place is like 95% TYT on.
You guys, the Young Turks, which is my favorite channel, we're getting that message out.
Cenk and the Young Turks do an extraordinarily good job.
No matter what mainstream media says, you have to listen to the Young Turks.
The people who support us on the internet, that's what gives us strength. That's what allows anyone who was in there who was undecided to think, one side seems to be winning, they seem to have a bigger army, there might be a reason for that. So thank you guys.
Across the map are going to be so tight and so close that it is likely going to be very difficult to call this on election night.
The twin forces behind the Biden candidacy, the billionaires and the Bolsheviks.
Arizona, 19 million. For the vice president, 9 million, a little over 9 million for President Trump.
We are desperate for Donald Trump to not be president anymore because he's fascist and is a threat to our democracy. And we said that from day one. Yes, we want Biden to beat Trump. Is that clear enough?
It is increasingly difficult for the American public to get any sort of truth.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
People still don't know what the word feminist actually means. Not even that, people are still angered by the word.
People think feminist is a bad word, but it's not.
There are gradations, there are different waves. The people who are against gender equality love to use like militant feminists as the representatives of all feminists. It's untrue.
I don't know why you'd be threatened by strong women unless you were an incredibly weak man. If you don't have equal rights, or you're not treated the same way, well, wouldn't you be angry?
Peter Navarro recently went on Ari Melber's MSNBC show to talk about the Capitol riots on January 6th, which of course we are about to note the 1-year anniversary of. And I thought the way this conversation went down was really fascinating, especially since Peter Navarro doesn't seem to know what qualifies as a coup. Let's watch.
And was simply this. We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. The sweep was simply that. We were going to challenge the results of the election in the 6 battleground states. They were Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada. And basically, these were the places where we believed that if the votes were sent back to those battleground states, and looked at again, that there would be enough concern amongst the legislatures that most or all of those states would decertify the election.
Yeah, you just described this plan as a way to take an election where the outcome was established by independent secretaries of state, by the voters of those states, and legal remedies have been exhausted with the Supreme Court never even taking, let alone siding with, any of the claims that you just referred to. So legally, they went nowhere. And then you're describing a way that the incumbent, hold on, you will get your turn. I just let you go for a while. Let's go this back and forth, sir. Then you will use the incumbent losing party's power, that was the Republican Party that was losing power, to overtake and reverse that outcome. Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No, I totally reject many of your premises there.
So, there are military coups and then there are political coups. And what he described is a political coup. Joe Biden, despite all of the criticism that I have toward him, won the election. He won the election. There were multiple recounts in those battleground states like Georgia, for instance, and Biden won. There were dozens of legal battles, all of which the Trump campaign lost. More than 60 court battles pertaining to the election results. Trump appointed judges dismissed his claims. I mean, it's incredible that a year out, it's been a year, and they continue with this nonsense. And it's ripping the country apart, just absolutely ripping the country apart. And by the way, this follows an entire 4-year term where Trump kept repeating that Hillary Clinton didn't accept the results of the 2016 election. I mean, the projection coming from Republican lawmakers, the Republican Party in general, is pretty incredible.
Yeah, exactly. She conceded immediately. Does that mean that she liked the results? No, obviously. And it irritated us that she constantly would come out and talk about it again because we were sick of hearing her, but she accepted it. Nobody tried to overturn it. Democratic legislatures around the country didn't radically revise their election laws to make it less likely to happen in the future. That's just not what happened. And in this case, they can't accept it. They have absolutely lost their minds. Have you seen the Donnie O'Sullivan video from CNN of him talking with Trump supporters about January 6th? No, they're absolutely insane. And we were told for the entire 4 years of Trump that if we had not any concerns that we thought meant, well, then that means that if this is true and they prove it, then they overturn the never anything like that. We were told that we had derangement syndrome. But you have people that not only think that the election was stolen and that it's obvious, despite no Republican secretaries of state accepting at the time, no judges being willing to accept it, a conservative Supreme Court not willing to get involved. When the Supreme Court has shown they're perfectly willing to overturn presidential elections to put Republicans in the White House in the past couple of decades, even then, they just accept that they are 100% right. And many of them believe that he will in fact be president, not in 2024, but before then. They are truly deranged, but we were mocked for literally years.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. It really is. And it has serious ramifications for the country, right? And I'm not
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
We do this game a lot, and I understand that at the end of the day it doesn't matter because they're complete hypocrites. In the same way that they believe that Pence can just be like, no, you don't get to, I'm the vice president, I'm a Republican, so you don't get to win. They think that, and we say, okay, so do you believe that Kamala Harris can do that in 2024? And obviously they don't. I do wish that Ari Melber, while doing a pretty good job in that interview, had turned around to Peter Navarro and said, okay, so in future elections, if there are enough states that Republicans win that have Democratic legislatures, can they just throw it back to the states? Can they do what your Green Bay, whatever it is that they're trying to colloquially call their plan? Can the Democrats do that? Is it just a matter of, do you have the state legislatures? Elections don't matter anymore, only state legislatures matter. They don't actually believe that, obviously. And no Republican watching it would believe that what they have tried to do and what they would like to do is actually acceptable for a Democrat to do.
I mean, they were aggrieved at the idea of people voting by mail during a pandemic. They thought that was wrong. So just, again, let all of that sink in. Peter Navarro knows, that's the thing that gets me. Peter Navarro knows the election was not stolen. Many of the most vociferous, the perpetuators of the big lie know without a shadow of a doubt that Biden won the election. But despite all the damage that it's doing to this country, despite the fact that it continues to divide, despite the fact that it leads to violence and fellow Americans hating each other, they keep doing it because they don't want to upset Trump's base. They don't want to upset Trump. And more importantly, when it comes to members of the media, there's money to be made. And they know that they can attract an audience if they're willing to continue with those lies. It's just the profit motive behind media has a lot of consequences to it. I think this is one of them. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, Emma Watson is now being smeared as an anti-Semite after posting her solidarity with Palestinians. So we've got that story and more when we come back.
You are the media revolution. You are much needed.
TYT! TYT!
Your place is like 95% TYT on.
You guys, the Young Turks, which is my favorite channel, we're getting that message out.
Cenk and the Young Turks do an extraordinarily good job.
No matter what mainstream media says, you have to listen to the Young Turks.
The people who support us on the internet, that's what gives us strength. That's what allows anyone who was in there who was undecided to think one side seems to be winning. They seem to have a bigger army. There might be a reason for that. So thank you guys.
Across the map are going to be so tight and so close that it is likely going to be very difficult to call this on election night.
The twin forces behind the Biden candidacy, the billionaires and the Bolsheviks.
Arizona, 19 million. For the vice president, 9 million, a little over 9 million for President Trump.
We are desperate for Donald Trump to not be president anymore because he's fascist and is a threat to our democracy. And we said that from day one. Yes, we want Biden to beat Trump. Is that clear enough?
It is increasingly difficult for the American public to get any sort of truth.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
People still don't know what the word feminist actually means. Not even that. People are still angered by the word.
People think feminist is a bad word, but it's not.
There are gradations, there are different waves. The people who are against gender equality love to use like militant feminists as the representatives of all feminists. It's untrue.
I don't know why you'd be threatened by strong women unless you were an incredibly weak man. If you don't have equal rights, or you're not treated the same way, well, wouldn't you be angry?
Our main show is almost over, but for those of you who want additional content, you can become a member and check out our bonus episode tonight after the main show. You can become a member by clicking on the join button on YouTube or going to youtube.com/join. Also, after the bonus episode, you can check out Happy Half Hour hosted by our very own Brett Ehrlich on our Twitch channel. That's over at twitch.tv/TYT, so make sure you check that out as well. All right, let's get to our next story, which I saved specifically for you, John Iderola. So let's do it. Actress and activist Emma Watson took to Instagram to show solidarity with Palestinians. Here is her post, which unfortunately led to quite a bit of backlash. She not only tweeted, or I should say posted that photo that says solidarity is a verb. The caption also says, solidarity does not assume that our struggles are the same struggles, or that our pain is the same pain, or that our hope is for the same future. Solidarity involves commitment and work, as well as the recognition that even if we do not have the same feelings or the same lives or the same bodies, we do live on common ground. And she's quoting Sarah Ahmed there. And since it had to do with Palestinians, as I think most people who follow these types of stories can expect, she got smeared as an anti-Semite. So I have a ton of these ridiculous comments in response to Emma Watson. But before we get to them, why don't I open the floor, John, for you to jump in and share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's hardly surprising. She's a high-profile celebrity who's been an activist for years and years and years. This is entirely consistent with not only her seeming worldview, but her social media activity. And because she's popular and well liked and respected, and has I believe been involved in some ways with the UN previously. They're gonna hate if she does something even as benign as what she did. The post and with the image and the quote are great. They're also not highly specific. It's talking about sort of, it's literally solidarity in a very vague sense. I have no idea what specifically she wants politically done, but she's also not making any specific political demands. She's not making any specific political criticisms of the current Israeli government or specific military actions they've taken. She's not doing any of those things. All she's saying is, these are humans like any humans. We should feel some sort of kinship and solidarity for them. And even that is too much for some people, because she might inspire one of her millions and millions and millions of followers to similarly think, well, this is a people that I don't necessarily know. I may never have been to Palestine. I might not know any Palestinians. I've never really thought about it before, but she is right. We all are humans, and they cannot take that stimulus to even basic human decency.
Well, let's get to the various people who have smeared her as an anti-Semite for that. You're right, John, vague post meant to show.
I'm not saying vague in a critical way.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
She's doing everything to not open herself up to exactly this sort of nonsensical attack.
Exactly.
And it still comes anyway.
Yeah, it's not like she's mentioning the settlements in East Jerusalem. She's not talking about the open air prison that Palestinians are living in. She's not talking about this apartheid state. She's not talking about any of that specificity. It's just a general post meant to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. And this is the kind of response that she got. Here's Ambassador Gilad Erdogan, who says, fiction may work in Harry Potter, but it does not work in reality. If it did, the magic used in wizarding, in the wizarding world, could eliminate the evils of Hamas, which oppresses women and seeks the annihilation of Israel, and the PA, which supports terror. I would be in favor of that. But what about the Palestinian people who are being evicted from their homes in East Jerusalem so they can then be taken up by Israeli citizens? What about the Palestinians living in an open air prison who are being denied humanitarian aid, especially during the coronavirus pandemic? What about all those human rights abuses? Because it's easy to point to Hamas. Obviously, there are huge issues with Hamas. I'm not trying to be an apologist for them at all. But a lot of the brutal behavior of the Palestinian government has been directed toward the Palestinian people. The brutal behavior of the Israeli government toward the Palestinian people. And that gets kind of lost in the smears toward Emma Watson and the smears toward anyone, by the way, who just calls for a little more humanity in the treatment of the Palestinian people.
Yeah, well, and she's not saying that she supports either of those organizations, let alone specific things that they do. The conflating of every single Palestinian with whatever the worst thing some other Palestinian did is obviously on its face insane, and he would never allow it if you were to take the most barbaric, warmongering, bloodthirsty actions of military or political leaders in various Israeli regimes over the past 50 years and then apply them to literally every single Israeli citizen. He'd never accept that, and we shouldn't accept it in this case either. Nor should we accept the insanely condescending, infantilizing, and I would argue at least mildly misogynistic attempt to take Emma Watson, who has literally been an activist for more years than she ever acted in the Harry Potter movies, and reduce her to just being someone who was involved with Harry Potter. Yeah, as he did in his statement.
That's a great point. I want to get to graphic 6 here. This is Blake Flayton, and I think his tweet, his criticism is among the most insane. Just in case you need an example of how disproportionate a hatred anti-Zionism is, Emma Watson just shared a solidarity with Palestine post on Instagram where she has 64 million followers. Okay. 4 times the amount of Jews on planet Earth. Okay. But sure, their state is the problem. She never said that the existence of Israel is a problem. Like, she never said that, ever. But let's actually,
the existence of brain worms is a problem, and that person who posted that has a serious case of it.
And I want to get to some of the numbers, because here's what the reality is on the ground whenever the violence erupts, okay? So in 2021, Israeli security forces killed 313 Palestinians, including 71 minors, children, 236 in the Gaza Strip, 232 of them during Operation Guardian of the Walls, and 77 in the West Bank. Israeli forces also destroyed record numbers of Palestinian homes and infrastructure in 2021. So I think that those are legitimate criticisms. That's not a criticism of Jewish people, of Jewish religion. It is a criticism of the behavior specifically of the Israeli government toward the Palestinian people. And this tactic of immediately smearing anyone who wants to be critical of Israel's government as anti-Semitic, it's not really working anymore. People can see what's happening, they know what's happening, and I'm glad to see that the smears aren't discouraging people like Emma Watson from speaking out, even if it lacks the specificity that we would have here on this show. So keep watching the Young Turks, because we'll keep talking about it. All right, bonus episode is next. You don't want to miss it. Lots of great stuff to share with you, including Melania Trump auctioning off incredibly goofy hats.
You are the media revolution. You are much needed.
TYT! TYT!
The place is like 95% TYT army.
You guys, the Young Turks, which is my favorite channel, we're getting that message out.
Cenk and the Young Turks do an extraordinarily good job.
No matter what mainstream media says, you have to listen to the Young Turks.
All the people who support us on the internet, that's what gives us strength. That's what allows anyone who was in there who was undecided to think, one side seems to be winning, they seem to have a bigger army, there might be a reason for that. So thank you guys.
Across the map are going to be so tight and so close that it is likely going to be very difficult to call this on election night.
The twin forces behind the Biden candidacy, the billionaires and the Bolsheviks.
Arizona, 19 million. For the vice president, 9 million, a little over 9 million for President Trump.
We are desperate for Donald Trump to not be president anymore because he's fascist and is a threat to our democracy. And we said that from day one. Yes, we want Biden to beat Trump. Is that clear enough?
It is increasingly difficult for the American public to get any sort of truth.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
People still don't know what the word feminist actually means. Not even that, people are still angered by the word.
People think feminist is a bad word, but it's not.
There are gradations, there are different waves. The people who are against gender equality love to use like militant feminists as the representatives of all feminists. It's untrue.
I don't know why you'd be threatened by strong women unless you were an incredibly weak man. If you don't have equal rights, or you're not treated the same way, well, wouldn't you be angry?